Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the Middle Colonies, Chapter 3-3. Okay, how did the diverse Middle Colonies develop and thrive? Colonists settled in the Middle Colonies for freedom of religion or to profit from trade, farming, or other occupations. Factors such as fertile soil, manufacturing, and social equality promoted the colony's prosperity. The geography of the Middle Colonies. Again, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware were the Middle Colonies. Much of the Middle Colonies would be lowlands. The Hudson and Delaware rivers are important waterways in the region. The soil is fertile and well suited for crops like wheat, fruits, and vegetables. So again, this is unlike the New England colonies where the soil was rocky, the climate was cool. The Middle Colonies, the soil is much different and better suited for farming. The climate also is warmer with a longer growing season than the New England climate. New York began as the Dutch colony of New Netherland, which owed its economic success to trade with Native Americans in British colonies. However, New Netherland had only a small Dutch population, and its other colonists were often hostile to Dutch rule. So again, if you look at the population of New Netherland, again, you had the Dutch, and then you had much more Swedish, French, Portuguese, and English. England and Holland had tense relations for the following reasons. New Netherland separated England's northern colonies from its more southern colonies. That bothered England. New Netherland traded with English colonies, which violated Britain's mercantile laws. Those are trade laws. So again, England wanted the English colonies all to themselves. They wanted to reap the economic benefits, thus the products that were created and produced in the New World, such as lumber, crops such as tobacco. They didn't want the colonies trading with anybody but them, and New England was profiting from that trade, and that angered England. In 1664, England's King Charles II told his brother James, Duke of York, that he could have New Netherland if he conquered it. With the help of a few warships, James did just that. James renamed the colony New York and its capital New York City, and it became a royal colony. That means it's controlled by the king in 1685. In 1665, part of southern New York split off and formed a new colony, New Jersey. At first, New Jersey was a proprietary colony. That means owned by a single ruler. Kind of a proprietor would be an owner. But in 1702, it received a new charter as a royal colony. So again, at this point, we have royal colonies, we have proprietary colonies, and then we would have charter colonies. The Quakers emerged as a new religious group in England during the 1640s and the 1650s. The Quakers believed people do not need ministers because everyone has a direct link with God. Again, we're going to get into the Quakers with William Penn in Pennsylvania. But again, the Quakers were often persecuted in Europe and England, again, for these reasons. They believed that they had a direct link with God, whereas the Puritans were very structured in their church. So the Quakers would not at all be welcome in a Puritan church. They believed all people are equal in God's eyes. Women were equal to men in spiritual matters. They believed that slavery was wrong. So again, they had a much different interpretation on the Bible than, say, the Puritans and the Church of England. So as you can figure out at this point, they're probably not going to be very welcome in England. Quaker leader William Penn wanted to find a place where Quakers could live free of persecution. He used his connections to get a charter from the king for a new colony in North America. And Pennsylvania would have a charter. So think back to the Jamestown leadership activity that we did, and William Penn was one of those leaders. Not with a whole lot of experience, but as time would prove, he would be a pretty decent leader. Penn arrived in the Pennsylvania colony in 1682 and established its capital, Philadelphia. Penn considered his colony to be a, quote, holy experiment of people from different faiths living together in peace. There were many settlers from many different countries, such as England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Germany, Holland, Switzerland. So you had people from many different nations that were living in Pennsylvania, not just England. When we look at Massachusetts Bay, the colonists that were there were from England. But again, Pennsylvania was different. In 1682, Penn wrote a document that granted Pennsylvania an elected assembly and provided for freedom of religion. So Penn at first is a proprietor, that means an owner, but again, he'll begin to release control, and you'll see that Pennsylvania will eventually have an elected assembly. That means elected leaders, or another way of saying that would be representative government. And also he'll have freedom of religion. Penn tried to deal with Native Americans fairly. He did not allow colonists to settle on land until Native Americans sold it to them. So again, this was part of William Penn and his belief system. During Penn's lifetime, relations between Native Americans and colonists were much better in Pennsylvania than they were in other colonies. There's no record that William Penn ever cheated any Native American out of any land. Control of the Delaware colony passed from the Swedish to the Dutch to the English. Penn's charter for Pennsylvania included Delaware, but he gave the colony its own representative assembly. In other words, people could elect their leaders from amongst themselves to govern. In 1704, Delaware became a separate colony. By the early 1700s, more than 20,000 colonists lived in Pennsylvania. Its wheat farms were productive, and Pennsylvania was called America's breadbasket. So again, because of the conditions, because William Penn not only allowed many people to live in the colony from different nations, whether it be Sweden, Holland, Germany, whatever, people brought their different Christian denominations to the colony. And again, whereas in Massachusetts Bay Colony, you had to, subscribe to the Puritans' view of how they understood the Bible, whereas in Pennsylvania, many, many different denominations existed. And even outside of the Christian tradition, you even had Jewish colonists that were welcome to live in Pennsylvania, provided that they followed the laws of the colony. But again, as far as the economy goes, we have cattle, fish, grain, rum, lumber, iron. So again, in some respects, somewhat different. But again, you have this is not the New England colonies. You have more opportunities for growing crops because of the climate, because of the soil. Pennsylvania is what we would call a mix. Okay, so it's a mix between New England and the South. We haven't talked about the South yet, but I would think you would imagine the South would be very heavily, laden for farming, whereas New England was very structured for, an economy that would involve fishing, shipbuilding, iron. The middle colonies are kind of a combination of the two, which would make it a pretty decent place to live. You're not all industry, you're not all farming, you have a mixture, and Pennsylvania wouldn't be a bad place to live. Again, there were many freedoms that existed there. Manufacturing was just beginning in the middle colonies during the 1700s. Manufacturers produced iron, flour, and pepper. Town artisans worked as weavers, masons, coopers. A cooper is a barrel maker, and in many other trades. By the middle of the 1700s, many settlers were pushing south and west along the backcountry or frontier between Pennsylvania and Georgia. The backcountry settlers that traveled along the Great Wagon Road often fought with Native Americans. So this would be years after Penn was there, and you're having more conflict with Native Americans. So the further you got out to the frontier, the more problems you're going to have with the natives. Many of the people who settled in the backcountry were not English. Some were Scotch, Irish, and others were German. So again, very common for the middle colonies to have a diverse group of people, not only with their religion, but again also with their nationality. By 1750, non-English immigrants had made the middle colonies the most diverse part of English North America. Philadelphia and New York had become the largest cities and busiest ports in the colonies. All of the colonies had thriving economies. So again, in the middle colonies, things were booming. People were immigrating there, and again, it was very successful. Okay, thanks for listening, and refer back to this should you need to.